Hello everyone, and welcome to this video presentation on the material related to developing a marketing plan. As figure 5.1 from your text notes, the management marketing cycle goes through three phases. We start with marketing planning. That planning then leads to the execution, and then the final stage is the evaluation of your marketing efforts. That evaluation then becomes the foundation or information for the next round of marketing planning. There are two broad types of marketing plans. You have strategic marketing plans, which are developed from looking at the core business strategy of your organization and looking at what your objectives are for the marketing portion. These are broad-based strategies to achieve your marketing objectives. The second type is the tactical marketing plans. These focus on implementing those broad strategies. So the tactics, or the tactical portion, are these specific things that you do. So for example, you may have a strategy that involves increasing your social media presence to develop more loyal fans. The tactical marketing talks about what types of tactics you will actually use. So you'll break into different social media platforms, what will be created for each platform, the schedule, the timing, and so forth. Your text notes that writing marketing plans is not without its disadvantages. So it goes through and identifies some of the most common advantages and disadvantages in the creation of marketing plans. For example, with advantages, it can, if you have a plan in place, it can help the firm cope with any changes that they need to make. They can go back and look at the plan and see what direction they should go when choices need to be made, especially choices on a very short time frame. It helps you focus on the objectives that you want to achieve so that you're constantly moving towards those objectives. It can help in decision making. It can force managers to actually examine operations because there's an evaluation function as part of it. And it does provide clear criteria for how this is all going to be evaluated. The biggest disadvantage, however, is probably that it's time consuming. And for these plans to work, they actually need to be supported by top management, partially because they're going to require a commitment of resources. They may not be objective and they may not be accurate. There's usually a short time frame. If you don't have very much time, it may affect the quality of putting them together. And you may not actually have the expertise within your staff to create something like this. Figure 5.2 in your text goes through the four-step process in the developing of a market plan. The first step, of course, is to figure out where you are now, and that's done by conducting a situation analysis. It describes the current situation, which is an honest look at where we are, our strengths, weaknesses, and so forth. That look is then used to define the goals and objectives, our general goals and more specific objectives we want to achieve based on where we are now. Those goals and objectives tell us where we want to be. The third step then is to define your marketing strategies and action plans. If we already know where we are and we know where we want to be, the third step then is a description of how we get from where we are now to where we want to be. And that's where you define those general strategies that I mentioned previously, as well as the action plans. What are we actually going to execute? What tactics are we going to use? What time frame and so forth to make this happen? The fourth step then is to implement these action plans and to monitor the performance. That monitoring the performance ends, of course, with a detailed evaluation, and that evaluation then feeds back and becomes part of the situation analysis in the future when you go through the planning process again. The first step in the planning process, as was just mentioned, is the situation analysis. The situation analysis begins by looking at your market, looking at where you are right now in terms of the market summary. So you look at target markets, the demographics of the individuals in your target markets and in the market area, the needs of those individuals, trends, say industry trends or local regional trends, and the potential for market growth and where that market growth may be. To do this, we often take all of that information and boil it down into four categories. It's called the SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis emphasizes the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are faced by the organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these 4 elements because they're so important to the situation analysis. The 4 elements of the SWOT model are generally broken down into 2 broader categories, the internal forces and the external forces. Each one of them emphasizes something positive or negative. So for example, in the internal forces, these are things within your organization that you have the ability to change or to control. That includes the positive elements of the strengths that you bring to this process, as well as the organization's weaknesses. The external forces are those factors outside of your control. There are things outside of your organization that you do not have the direct ability to control or to change. There are some positive things that are external to the organizations. Those are generally opportunities that you can take advantage of to help advance the organization and the objectives of the organization. And then there are the threats. So if you were developing a marketing campaign, you might say that an opportunity exists in a market that is not tapped yet. So you have an area of tourism where there are very few resorts, but there is a potential for a lot more resort activity, and so that is an opportunity waiting for you. The threat, however, could be that on that same location, that the local government, for example, is not open to the development of new resorts. Both of those things are out of your control. The opportunity can change, but the threat is also there. Going through each of the 4 elements of the SWOT, we'll start with strengths. Remember, strengths are those internal factors, the internal positive elements that the organization has control over. You can often access or describe those strengths by asking yourself certain questions, and these are examples of some of the questions that you might want to ask yourself. The last one is probably one of the most important. What is your organization's unique selling proposition? What do you offer that others don't? Something that you can control and something that you can bring to the game to help leverage and to help the organization achieve the opportunities that you have identified. The other element of the internal forces includes the weaknesses, and here are some of the questions that you can ask in order to determine a list of the possible weaknesses of the organization. The third element of the SWOT analysis, the external side, is the opportunities. Here we're trying to locate good opportunities that we can take advantage of and that we can leverage for the development of our organization and hopefully help us to achieve the objectives that we've defined in our planning process as an organization. So for example, you might look for things where there have been changes in technology that could make your operations more efficient or could offer something to clientele that they aren't currently receiving. Have there been changes in government policy, tax structures, or something that would give you an opportunity to develop in an area that you couldn't develop before? Have there been changes in society in general and lifestyle? So when we did the environmental scan earlier, we talked about that. You want to look at trends that are happening in society to see if we can jump on any of those trends. And for the first written paper, many of you discussed those trends and how an organization might be able to leverage some of those in the future. And that leveraging is used to achieve an opportunity. The final element of SWOT analysis is the external element of threats. Threats are things that would prevent you. They're obstacles that would prevent you from achieving the opportunities that you've indicated earlier. These are generally things outside of your control. So technological issues, standards, government controls, regulations, attitudes of individuals in society. All of these things can prevent you from achieving an objective, but they're outside of your control. So you either need to figure out a way to leverage your strengths to try and overcome those threats or to prevent those threats from having opportunity, or possibly changing your plans to avoid some of the threats. When all 4 of the quadrants are put together, what you find is a general model that looks something like this. And it's very common at the end of a situation analysis to end it with the SWOT analysis so that it summarizes those key elements of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are important from the situation analysis that we need to consider as you move forward in the planning of your marketing efforts. Now that we've defined the situation, the second step involves defining your goals and objectives. Your goals, again, are those broad-based statements of the directions that you'd like to go or the things that you'd like to achieve. They're generally not very measurable. Objectives, on the other hand, are much more specific. They are specific, measurable statements of what you need to do or what you need to accomplish for that goal to be reached. Very often, an individual goal will have multiple objectives behind it. In other words, if we want to improve customer loyalty, we might have a number of different elements that we'll need to do in order to achieve that general goal of increasing loyalty. There's an example here of an objective that says to have 500 USC students attend the 2021 block party prior to the final home football game on April 24th. That objective is very specific, it's very measurable, it's time-based, and it tells you exactly what you want to achieve, but it may be that one objective is actually part of a broader goal that talks about having a successful block party. To help people write objectives properly, I often suggest that they think of the acronym SMART. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. You need to offer specific statements of what you want to achieve. What you want to achieve has to be measurable. Can I quantify or measure something in the end? It has to be achievable, and some people also say acceptable. Acceptable to the client, acceptable to your organization. Will your bosses think that this objective is high enough, or do they want you to achieve even more? Balanced with that is the fourth one, which is realistic. Do you have the resources to make those objectives happen? You can set an objective very high, but if you don't have the human power or the financial means to achieve that, then there's not much point of defining it as an objective. And then finally, most objectives are time-based. We indicate when the objective will be achieved by, and in doing so, we set up the beginning of the evaluation stage. So you could specify that something must be done by the end of the quarter, within the next month, or by a particular date, by the end of February of 2022. And then we know that at that point, we conduct the final evaluations to determine whether or not the objective has been achieved. Your text suggests that there are four main categories of objectives that an organization might be interested in when developing their marketing plans. Some of your objectives might focus on the sales side of it. So your sales and financial objectives. We want to maximize the profit. We want to increase our sales revenues in a particular area. We'd like to capitalize on a gap in the market share and seize more market share. The other side is, a third category is competitive. These objectives define our relationship to our competitors, and either that's to decrease competition, to have competitive parity, to reach the market leader, for example, in a particular brand category. You might also look directly at customers, and some of the examples I've given earlier are more in the customers area. So we want to increase awareness, we want to improve the image of our organization, or to establish a new image or a new brand identity. We might be trying to increase customer satisfaction, particularly in a new area, say a new product development, or we may be trying to create goodwill through our corporate social responsibility actions. Here are some example SMART objectives by different categories. For example, if you were talking about profitability, you might say you want to achieve a 20% return on capital employed by 2022. Market share. Maybe you want to specify a particular share of the market you'd like to have increased. For example, to gain 5% of the market for guided fishing tours by September of 2022. Or third, A promotional objective, to increase the sales of appetizers by 10% for the first quarter of 2022 over the first quarter of 2020. This one, the final one, defining the range, the beginning or the benchmark, as well as the final point. This slide presents 3 more examples of objectives. In this case, the objective for survival might be changed and rephrased to survive the current pandemic. Objectives for growth, you might specify the size of growth that you want in a particular operation by a particular date. And then objectives for branding. In this case, to make Y brand of bottled beer the preferred brand in a particular age category in North America by 2022. If you remember the strategic marketing planning process that was modeled earlier, the third step is to define the strategies and action plans that you'll be taking. Within this portion, there are a variety of things that you can discuss, but I pulled out a couple of things that I thought were particularly important as discussed in the book. One of them is the general growth strategies. How do you plan to expand in markets and products that you offer or services that you offer? And your text describes these 4 market growth strategies: market penetration, development, product development, or product diversification. The market penetration strategy is one in which you do not expand into a new market or develop new products. So you're using your existing products and service portfolio and staying in the same market, so the same city, the same state, the region, or country, and you're not expanding that. But what you're trying to do is to penetrate more deeply in your existing market that you have. So you can do this by trying to get people to come more frequently. So for example, if you run a restaurant, this strategy would not involve building new restaurants in new areas or coming out with new products or service lines. This would involve encouraging people to come more frequently than they normally do, and or to poach individuals or to take individuals away from your competitors and pull them in to your organization. What you're trying to do is to increase your overall sales and possibly trying to increase your share of the market sales in your particular industry category. The product development category has the organization staying within their current market, their existing market, but they develop new products or new services within that market to try and expand overall sales and market share. So the product development strategy focuses on growth through developing new products, but staying within the market that you have. If you, for example, have that restaurant in a local area, you're going to stay in that particular area, but you're going to develop new products or services to increase your overall sales. A local example of product development would be if the National Music Museum decided, now that they've expanded the size of the museum, to start offering that as an event facility. They wouldn't be changing the existing market in which they operate, but they would be offering a new product or service line, that being having the facility offered as an event location. The market development strategy focuses on growth, but that growth comes not from expanding what you offer, but instead focusing on new markets. So for example, the National Music Museum might start working with bus tour groups coming from a farther region or coming from a greater distance. So they may start working with groups coming from Chicago or from the Denver area and making it a stop for some of these regional bus tours. The final growth strategy option is product diversification. And in this strategy, you really are taking on a great deal of risk. Reason for that is you're not only creating a new product or service line, but you're also moving into a new market at the same time. So there's a great deal of risk to be achieved, but there's also a great deal of reward, possibly too. One of the things that you have to be aware of, and it was discussed in your text, is that you have to be careful not to cannibalize your current sales. So if you are developing a new product line, moving into a new market area, you have to be sure that the growth that you see is not growth at the expense of what you were achieving prior to the development of this new product line in the new market area. So for example, if the National Music Museum started offering training on antique musical instruments, so they went to another location. They went to DePaul University in Chicago and started offering training on antique musical instruments. That would be a new product and also in a new market area. The startup expenses would be quite a bit. The return on that could be fantastic, but there is a great deal of risk involved. That brings us to the end of the material that I'm going to discuss that's related to Chapter 5 on market planning. There are some additional topics discussed in the text that I wanted to point out to you. They talk about the remaining elements of Step 3, which are the execution and implementation elements. They also talk about budgets and sales forecasting. And then, if you remember the original model, the fourth step in the model was the evaluation of the performance. And so that is also discussed right at the end of the chapter. Make sure that you study all of these elements, and also make sure that you let me know if you have any questions. Again, you can email them to me. It's chuck.lubers@usd.edu, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.